All right, let's get started. Everybody hear me okay? Okay, good. Good, thank you. My name's Craig Beles, and I'm going to be your MC for this evening, this Legislative Community Forum, which was organized and is hosted by Islanders for Ferry Action. Thank you all for attending. I'm certain that this is going to be a very informative evening. As per usual, a couple housekeeping things, actually more than a couple. Phones, if you could turn those off. We will not be passing a mic around here. The opportunity was, I think, to write down any questions you might have. We have a whole slew of questions. We have easy ones and hard ones. And any picking up you can do after yourselves, please, in terms of what you leave on the floor. So appreciate that, unless it's something really valuable, and then I'll get it. Let's welcome our 34th District legislators who braved the trek over to our island on the ferries that we rely on every day. Senator Emily Alvarado. Representative and Majority Leader Joe Fitzgibbon. And our newest representative, Brianna Thomas. It's a real honor and a pleasure to have all three of you here with us this evening, and we appreciate you making the effort to come on over. We look forward to learning about your key takeaways from the 2025 session. And hearing your responses to our community's questions. Quick overview of how we're going to proceed. We are on an aspirational and very tight schedule. So I would, if you see me waving over here or doing this, that means we need to move on to the next question. First of all, you will each have 3 minutes to provide some opening remarks, 3 minutes apiece. Then we'll move into the questions that were submitted by several island partner organizations and provided to you in advance. I'll read the questions, and the one or two or three of you who want to answer that, I would ask that you try to limit your total response to 3 and maybe 4 minutes total. After I've asked and you've answered the first 5 or so questions, Beth Lindsay will perhaps hand me some additional questions. I already have a stack. Some additional questions, and I will carry on and try to get through as many of those as I can. And hopefully you will, as you hear some new questions, maybe you can take a lead, but if you've got something you want to add to what one of your fellow legislators said and you really feel it is necessary and will add something, go for it. Let's see. Then at approximately 7:20, we'll conclude with your short, and I mean short, 1.5 minute final remarks. And we will try to wrap it up by 7:30. I always try to get people out of here when they are planning on it, rather than lingering. So with that, let's get started. First of all, I'm going to ask you to make your initial 3-minute opening remarks. Who wants to open it up?
I'll do it.
Oh, go for it. Okay,
Senator,
all right,
Senator
I'll go
first.
for it.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. I'm Emily Alvarado, and it's an absolute privilege to be your state senator. As folks may remember, I was in the House just last election, and I was appointed to the Senate seat when Senator Joe Wynn went over to lead the Department of Commerce. So I jumped in this last session, jumping into the Senate, and I was just elected to finish this seat and stay in this seat, and it's really a total privilege to represent you. So a little bit about me. I live in West Seattle. I have 2 kids. outside of the legislature, I work a lot on affordable housing issues, and I bring that passion to the state legislature. I think we all know that affordability is a priority right now, and it's something that I stay laser focused on in Olympia. I serve on the Housing Committee, on the Labor Committee, and on Transportation, where I get to represent a lot of your interests as it comes to ferries, ferry service, and other parts of transportation system. Last session, and you'll hear more about this, we had some real obstacles in front of us. We faced a really significant budget deficit, and we came to the table making some cuts and raising some revenue so that we could protect some of the critical public services that we all think are important. You'll hear more about some of those investments in K-12 public schools, in transportation, in healthcare, in our social safety net. And beyond that, we know that we're facing really unprecedented times when it comes to the person in the White House and our federal administration really attacking us on all fronts when it comes to civil rights, when it comes to our democracy, when it comes to our social safety net. As I said, I'm a houser, even today, absorbing the news of clawing back millions of dollars in our communities that help people who are experiencing homelessness. So in Olympia, a lot of what you'll hear that we've done and we will continue to do in this session is figure out how we protect our values and our people here in Washington as we face these threats and challenges and chaos in the other Washington. And I'll leave it at that because that's probably my 3 minutes.
Thank you. Who wants to follow up?
I'll go ahead. I'm Joe Fitzgibbon. I'm one of your 2 state representatives. I have been doing this for a while now. I was elected in 2010, so I'm in my 8th term. I'm in my 2nd term as the majority leader in the House. I just have to say, I love coming to this community. I have always felt so welcome here, and also just such a strong connection with the values of Vashon and the way that people in this community come together to support each other and to support positive change, both here and in the world broadly. And I wish I had been coming here more. I will tell you why. I have a good excuse. I became a dad about 1.5 years ago, which has been the best thing ever. But it has meant that my availability to come to this beautiful community has been a little bit less during that time. So I'm really happy to have the opportunity to be here with you all tonight to answer your questions, to share some of what we've been working on, and to share what the path forward looks like. As you heard from Emily, we're in really difficult times as a state. Our budget situation is very difficult because the taxes that we collect to fund our shared public services, whether that's education or healthcare or the safety net or the transportation system, have not kept pace with the growth of our state and the growth of the cost of providing those services. So, we had an enormous budget shortfall this last year, which we, as you heard from Emily, closed with a balanced mix of the most responsible that we could identify tax increases and the most responsible that we could identify reductions in spending, including some, in a lot of cases, just delaying planned increases of spending. But unfortunately, in the time since then, the people back in DC have made our lives quite a lot harder with devastating cuts, as well as government shutdown and a trade war, and a lot of things that really have compounded our budget shortfalls headed into this next session. So, we have our work cut out for us. I will say the thing I'm most proud of in the time that I've spent in office is my work on climate. I will say that Washington is either first or second in the country depending on how you look at it. I would say first, but some would say us in California are tied for first in terms of the strength of our climate policies and our commitment to getting to zero greenhouse gas emissions. We are working really hard to implement those laws successfully so that other states want to do it too. That's the thing, is that you can't solve climate change just Washington and California. You need other states to join in. And so we're trying to just show that those laws are working really well, that they're making our economy stronger, not weaker. And that's something that I'm really excited to continue.
Thank you. Representative Thomas.
Hey, everybody, I'm Brianna. Can you hear me?
No.
Is it on?
There.
Oh, how about now? Am I doing it? I'm the newest one. I'm Representative Brianna K. Thomas, and I want to start by thanking you for your votes to make me your duly elected representative. It's been a whole 8 days, and I can tell you every day it gets a little more serious, and I'm learning a ton from these two. You'll notice I usually go last because I just want to see what they haven't covered already. I grew up in a military family, 4 generations of public service. I come from a people's family. I got teachers, I got pastors, I got nurses, I got home health care providers, all in my background, so I come to public service fairly honestly and with a high level of expectation from my family members to do a good job. My day job, I work for the fine city of Seattle in the Human Services Department. I work on programming and policy making around gun violence interruption and a response to the fentanyl crisis, which I think we know are impacting our youth disproportionately. I am the 14th member of the Legislative Black Caucus, making us the largest Black caucus on the West Coast, suck it, California.
So cool.
And I'm really proud to represent this community. I think that this year in the legislature, I learned a lot about the things that I thought I could do and the things that I can actually do, and the delta between the two. I think I'm a genius. I think I have fantastic policy ideas and everyone should just go with them. And then Joe, ever so gently and lovingly, reminds me that there are 57 other Democrats that also think they're geniuses and have opinions, and everyone should just do what they say. So this year, this upcoming session, I am looking on refining my teamwork, improving my lasagna recipe for the freshman caucus, because it turns out the cafeteria downstairs, while present, is not ideal. And I think mostly just really bringing a little more humanity to an institution that feels very sterile, like the walls are literally marble. It's not the warmest place to do the business of democracy. So that's sort of what my office is about. My lovely legislative aide, Jordan Schamberg, is in the back. Would you wave, Jordan? There she is. That's Jordan. She's the one responding to all your emails and helping keep time. And so that's sort of my major priority, in addition to supporting workers and making sure that our youngest community members and oldest community members are not starving in the face of a snap cliff.
All right, thank you very much. Without further ado, we are going to move into the questions. And we're going to start out with our partner organizations on the island who have submitted questions. And since Islanders for Ferry Action are the host, they're going to get the first question. And I apologize, but I don't have these memorized. I'm going to read these. Islanders for Ferry Action thanks all 3 of you for the work you have done to fund training and hiring to help mitigate some of the staffing challenges that cause so many ferry delays and cancellations. The fact remains we constantly face the potential for major ferry outages due to the aging fleet. Even worse, Washington State Ferries has decided the Triangle route will provide the backup vessel for any outage of more than 24 hours anywhere in the entire system. Washington State Ferries has announced that we will be down to a ferry, by a ferry for 2 months in 2026 for planned maintenance on other vessels, about 15% of all our runs next year, not counting for unplanned outages. For each of you, what actions can you take to effect a rebalancing of this burden among all routes?
So I'll start by saying that the legislature over the last couple of years has made a really strong commitment to building new ferries. We know that there's really 2 drivers of the instability and the unreliability of the ferry system. One is staffing and crew shortages, and that was most acute, during and immediately after the pandemic, and then just the age of the fleet. And that is something we have a lot of boats in the pipeline being built. We just Governor Ferguson awarded a contract to, for the first time in the history of the state ferry system, to an out-of-state shipyard. There's a lot of controversy around that, but that is one way that we think that we can deliver ferries for island communities and West Sound communities faster and at a lower cost. We also have increased our transportation revenue in order to make sure that we could keep paying for the service that we provide today. We passed a 6-cent increase in the gas tax. Nobody likes paying more taxes. Gas taxes are one of the least popular taxes, but we know that that's necessary for communities that rely on the state ferry system as a lifeline. So while I know that those ferries are not in service yet, it does take a couple years to get the bids and to get the ferries under contract and sea tested and in service. There is hope on the horizon. And then on the relief vessel issue.
Yeah, so a few things. First, I'll start off by acknowledging you live on an island, you deserve reliable transportation, and we're working on it. I know it doesn't feel like it, but what I can say is that this last session, transportation budget, like all our budgets, was very hard. And we made a lot of cuts, and we didn't fund a lot of things, but there were a couple of key focus areas for all of us, and including for Democrats. One was we need preservation operations and maintenance, and I think people are more orienting towards let's get the things we have working well. That's a shift, and so making that shift is important. Two, real strong focus across the board. Governor recognized, we know we have to make the ferry system work. And then three, one thing I'll note about the last budget is that even though we made a lot of programmatic cuts, we did maintain funding. We made $11 million of investments in the workforce development because we know that you can't turn off the spigot on growing that workforce pipeline and then expect it to start up again. So we're going to continue to work, and I know there are more questions about how we have a diverse workforce, how do we get a workforce that represents the island where people have ties to Vashon, but we're going to keep working on developing that workforce pipeline. A few other technical things. One is, and I know, thank you to Hadley from the ferries for being here and for engaging with us all. I know that the service disruption plan is, I think, what it's called, and that's where it talks about what boats will be used when there is a shortage somewhere else. That is under review. A new service disruption plan will come out in 2026. Please feel free to give us feedback, to give Washington State Ferries feedback. We need to keep reviewing how we choose what vessels are used during those disruption periods. But that is currently under review, and hopefully it's an opportunity to look at how we share the burden across the system when there are disruptions. And it's on my radar, so please feel free to send feedback as that comes out. Is there a timeline for draft when it'll be out, or? Thank you. That was gracious of you to let me just put you on the spot like that. Probably not cool of me, but so early 2026, we're going to get that service disruption plan out. That's the piece that's identifying when a vessel will move to take care of other shortfalls throughout the system. The other thing I mentioned is last year, all three of us fought really hard for expanded and maintained water taxi service. You know, when I came here just a few years ago and these were desperate times, we said, aha, how about water taxi service? We went and we did, and we fought for that. And let me tell you, that wasn't actually an easy fight. There are other legislators who are not at all interested in funding what they believe is a county service. And we fought, we delivered a federal fund swap to help make funds available that now gets not only the maintained weekday service, but also the Saturday service. Let's prove that that Saturday service is needed. I love the idea that we can continue this kind of service for our community. So I'll stop there.
We've clearly crossed the 4-minute mark.
We have, thank you. Thank you for everything you've done. you've asked for feedback. There's no shortage of feedback
Yeah, I
from
know.
Vashon Island that you'll be getting because, as you know, the ferry situation really did get totally critical
Yeah.
on this island from many, not just commuters, but healthcare, and et cetera, et cetera. And I appreciate that you recognize that we're an island. We actually had a ferry representative come out here probably 20 years ago that addressed us, and his answer was, well, you can always drive around. And he was serious.
No.
So we've come a long way. I appreciate that. All right, next question is from Vashon Household. There's a lot of emphasis on the housing crisis, and much funding has been made available, which is great. For smaller organizations like Vashon Household, however, there is little capacity, funding, or technical support to take advantage of these opportunities. Because we have received Housing Trust Fund build funding in recent years, we are ineligible for technical assistance. Millions in funding comprising half the amount that will be made available in total was announced in August by Commerce, which applications due in October to fund new projects that must begin construction by mid-2026. This is an almost impossible timeline for many small affordable housing nonprofits. Now, the question is specifically, can lawmakers advocate for provisions or set-asides for small, rural, and unincorporated communities like Vashon that need additional time and resources to take advantage of these badly needed funds?
I'll start us off, and let me start a little broader and then jump into the question. So the issue of housing affordability is top of mind for almost everyone across the country. Anywhere you go, you ask people what top 3 issues are impacting their future or their kids' future or your ability to make ends meet, and it's the cost of housing. So we have to do everything possible to help both bring down costs and keep people stable in their homes. One of the ways that we did that last session, I'm really proud that we led and passed legislation to cap excessive rent increases. One of the first pieces of legislation statewide that'll make it so that people who live in manufactured homes don't see their land lease go up more than 5% a year, and people in rental housing don't see their rent go up more than 7% plus CPI per year. It's not everything, but it's one tool in the toolbox. The other thing that we can do is invest directly in affordable housing, and we do that in our state through the Housing Trust Fund. Over the last several years, but especially in the last year, we've made record investments in the Housing Trust Fund. I see Chuck Weinstock there. Some of us old school folks in the housing world used to remember when the high water mark for housing investments at the state was $50 million. Last year, we put $600 million towards affordable housing investments. But you're right, on the question, we have to make sure that those investments are making its way to diverse communities across the state. There is actually a set aside in a portion of the trust fund to go to rural communities, but I've been out talking to rural communities and they feel like that money is not getting to them. So we have to see whether there are administrative things that can happen at Commerce or things that we can support legislatively to help make sure that diverse communities can access those resources. A couple other things we're up against in housing are, as I mentioned already, our communities are going to be losing tens of millions of dollars, if not more, from the federal government to support people who are currently housed and who may become homeless because of loss of funding. So we have to look to make sure our state investments prioritize keeping people housed. We can't see more people on our streets. It's totally unconscionable, and we have to direct resources there. I'm also looking at some creative ways and would love to work with Vashon Household on how we finance more affordable homeownership. We've expanded homeownership investments to make permanently affordable homes from state investments. It's a growing portion of investments that we make, but I think we can still get more creative. I have some legislation coming forward this session to look at new ways to finance affordable homeownership so it works more in places like Vashon. So I will pause there. We need to continue to do everything possible on housing because it's the single greatest cost in a household budget, and we can make real progress in having housing in all communities. You want to talk about more stuff we got?
I do want to talk about more stuff we've got. I think one of the things I'll add is two things. One, you'd be amazed how often we have to remind people that the 34th District has a rural community. Everybody pictures the stadium, the Great Wheel, downtown, West Seattle, and we're just like, guys, we have a whole island, like 37 square miles of island that you need to treat the same way you treat Central Washington or Cowlitz County, right? And I think like just reminding folks of the reality of what the district's parameters include and who it includes is often step one. And in terms of access to affordable housing and the universe of housing options that we have available, I'm really proud to be able to sponsor a companion bill to Senator Alvarado that limits the number of houses a corporation can own to 25. It turns out that if a corporation has the ability to buy an infinite number of houses, then working people don't have the ability to buy those houses. And if you can make an all-cash offer because you have $1 gajillion laying around in your Scrooge McDuck bank, regular working people who have 2 or 3 jobs and are raising children don't have access to those sorts of resources. So I think another piece of the puzzle is making sure that regular folks can actually purchase a home on the open market without having to, do battle with bots.
I'm wondering, is a 50-year mortgage part of your plan as well?
The answer is no.
No, actually, I mean, bad ideas aside, we have had some good ideas on down payment assistance. We actually did in the last few sessions establish and grow the Covenant Homeownership Act, one of the groundbreaking pieces of legislation that seeks to undo the legacy of racially restrictive covenants in Washington state by establishing a new down payment assistance program for people who were impacted by racially restrictive covenants and redlining, hoping to increase access to communities who have been locked out before and increase access to homeownership. So those kinds of good things we'll keep pushing on.
Wonderful. The next question is from the Vashon Maury Island Community Council, and I think everybody in here recognizes that these legislators are not federal legislators and probably permits them to sleep a little better at night. But there are the overlaps, obviously, and there's an attempt to arrogate a lot of authority to the feds that is affecting states. And the question from the Community Council is, what is the Washington State Legislature doing to add financial support and protections given federal actions defunding food, housing, education, health care, services, and also undermining state elections and rights of the LGBTQ+ and immigrants? Now there's a little question for you.
Okay, I'm gonna go first on this one. So a couple of things. One, I grew up on SNAP benefits, and I understand the difference between going to bed hungry and not. And I know what it looks like when you have one household be hungry versus 5 versus 10 versus an entire community. And the challenge that the federal government has set before us is, do we starve together or do we die alone? The options right now are feeding people in real time or challenging the cost of health insurance premiums in the future. And I think everybody on the stage agrees that you shouldn't have to make that choice. You shouldn't have to decide between eating food and buying medicine. And so I reject the premise to begin with. And I will say, Congresswoman Glusenkamp has made a decision. And I think as a Washingtonian, I'm really grappling with her willingness to cross the aisle, and I hope there's a strategy, and I hope she calls me with it, so I also can sleep better at night. But I do think that everybody in this community can identify with everyone that you listed. We've all been marginalized in some way at some point in life, and I think the state of Washington has done a fantastic job of saying every Washingtonian matters, whether or not you have the appropriate set of papers, or the appropriate and comfortable identity, or the appropriate place to live. All Washingtonians matter. And with SNAP benefits disproportionately benefiting people under 5 and folks under 60, I really think it's an abomination that the federal government is willing to starve children and seniors to get a political pool point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, we're in a deficit position here because what the federal government is doing is cruel. And it is, and we have 2 things that we need to do. One, we have to adjust our budget to fill in where the feds should be stepping up. And we can talk more about how difficult it is to have enough of a tax base to fill in for SNAP, to fill in for Medicaid. We're gonna fight to do that, but we actually can't hit the scale that the feds can do. And it's hard to know that that means that we might be leaving people behind. I would say as a Democratic caucus, we prioritize people having shelter, people having food, and people having health care, and we will continue to look to find the revenue that we need so that people have those basic needs. But I will admit that on the budget side, it will be hard. That's not the only place where we can fight back against the federal government's cruelty, though. One, we continue to be a state that looks towards how we protect immigrants and immigrant communities. We have Keep Washington working here in Washington, so our law enforcement is not supposed to work with ICE agents in immigration enforcement. We're going to keep looking at how we make sure that stays the law and is enforced and protected. Two, we're going to continue to stand up for LGBTQ people and for civil rights more broadly, and we're looking at what legislation we need to pass here, what data protection and privacy we need to continue to advance to make sure that communities are safe. So on the policy piece, I think you'll see some things this legislative session. You know, there are people who don't want masked ICE agents walking around. We'll see if we could do something about making sure that ICE agents don't wear masks. We're gonna look at how property is used by ICE. We will do as much as we can on the policy front. And on the budget front, this is when the conversation's gonna shift to how do we get revenue and how do we stay laser focused on making sure that people can meet their basic human needs. But it's gonna be hard to fill the billions of dollars of impact from federal cuts. This is the role of the feds, and they're being cruel.
Yeah, I mean, this is a wide open question, and you know, my colleagues have covered just a ton of ground there. I think a few other things I will add. I think part of the question was around elections. One really great thing that I don't think that the current president realizes is that there is an extremely limited role for the federal government in elections. Elections are a state responsibility, and our state election laws are very strong. There is currently a lawsuit by the Republican Party of Mississippi to require that all ballots be received by Election Day, not all mailed by Election Day, which would affect Mississippi, Washington, and 28 other states. You know, our excellent Attorney General Nick Brown is part of the coalition of states that is fighting that. We have a very strong state voting rights act to protect the rights of minority communities, particularly in largely Eastern Washington communities where they have been intentionally excluded from being able to be represented in local governments there. And we have started to really see that pay off in communities like Sunnyside that just elected a number of people of color to, you know, Latino people to their city council just last week. So that's elections. One other thing to add on immigration, the ICE facility, the ICE detention facility in Tacoma, which is the main ICE facility for the northwestern United States, has horrific conditions. A number of my colleagues have toured the facility. There's inadequate health care, inadequate food, just bad conditions there. We have tried just about everything we could think of to force that facility to close. We have not yet had a strategy that the federal courts said worked, but we continue to think of interesting new ways. And we also know that it's not just that detention facility in Tacoma. There's also smaller, kind of more off the books ICE holding facilities throughout the state. And we're trying to empower local governments to use their public health authority to regulate those facilities. But it's tricky. Whenever the state is trying to regulate the federal government, that's not always clear where our authority starts and stops. You know, on the budget, the two areas that were most, well, I'll say three areas that were most harmed by HR 1, the horrible bill that they passed over the summer. One, clean energy. They revoked incredibly important tax credits that passed under President Biden that would really empower us to move forward on clean energy. They didn't revoke all of them, but they revoked the biggest and most important ones. So a lot of renewable energy developers are rushing to try to get their projects under contract before they are excluded from that. But that's terrible, huge step back. Medicaid. Medicaid is a joint state and federal program, and most of the costs of it are paid for by the federal government. Some of the costs are paid for by the state. It varies based on the program and the population. Because Washington is one of the wealthiest states, we get less reimbursement than a state like Mississippi or Louisiana does, because we are in the top 5 states in terms of our income. That said, even here, it is an enormous part of our state budget, the federal contribution to Medicaid. And the steps back that the feds have taken, the work requirements that they're requiring us to implement are going to be, A, very expensive for us to implement, B, are not going to, help. I mean, they're not going to achieve what they think that they're going to achieve. What they're going to be is just extra red tape, from the Republican Party. They're just pushing red tape right and left, whether it's on Medicaid, SNAP, or anything else. So that's, Medicaid is the second biggest part of our budget after K-12 education. And so that's a struggle. This is the best thing I can say about what they passed is that most of the worst Medicaid cuts don't take effect until 2028. So I'm holding out hope that maybe a new Congress will come in and roll some of that back, but we can't, we don't know, right? And then SNAP, which used to be called food stamps, and now we call SNAP. It's 100% federal paid. The state administers the program, but the actual benefits are 100% federal paid. The state has a parallel program called the Food Assistance Program, which is for people who are not eligible for SNAP, and that is largely immigrant families in our state. That is state funded. The feds don't pay for food assistance for immigrant folks. As more people are kicked off of SNAP by work requirements and by red tape and just burdensome things that HR 1 included, a lot of them are going to shift onto our state program, which is going to be billions of dollars in costs. So, this is just some of the things that we're going to have to deal with this session. As we said before, we did about a little more in taxes than we did in cuts in the last budget, about $9 billion in taxes, $7 billion in cuts. The best thing I think that might come out of this is it seems like we might have a window of opportunity for real tax reform in this state, but the caveat there is that any significant tax reform does take a couple years to kick in. If you impose a new tax of any kind, it takes a little while for the administration of that to get set up. So we have to find a way to bridge, even if we are successful, which is not a sure thing, but I'm hopeful, in enacting progressive tax reform in our state. We have to find a way to bridge today until when we think that we can actually start bringing in revenue, ideally from the wealthiest people in the state, the people with the most ability to pay.
Yeah, so one more thing on food security in particular. So last session, I think we preserved and advanced almost all investments directly in feeding people, whether it was the senior food program, summer EBT program, food banks directly. One thing that there's still a gap on is looking at the higher scale regional distribution investments in food. So in cases where we have emergencies like we were almost facing, the regional distribution can make its way to the food banks. So we'll have to continue to look at, there was legislation floated last session about how we create a statewide food security plan. Things like that become increasingly important as we learn that we could be left behind by the feds in instances like this. But so last session, we preserved investments in directly feeding people. Now we're going to be absorbing costs for harming people with food assistance, and those, because that's what HR 1 does. So that's the kind of costs we're going to be facing this session.
That was a very important question, and it covered a lot of territory, and therefore I didn't hold you to your time limits, but I am going to ask you to try to tighten it up here so we can cover other topics. But that That was excellent. By the way, you answered, I think, one of the questions that Indivisible Vashon had, was going to ask about whether or not you would support legislation to you know, require ICE not to wear masks, or perhaps to get state police to enforce the law if federal agents violate the law, things along that nature. And it sounds like at least you're considering those kinds of options. Okay, while we're on the topic of immigrants, you were talking a minute ago, the organization Comunidad Latina de Vashon asks, they've been working with the Martin Luther King Labor Council to create pathways for Latinos into living wage union jobs. And they recently placed a community leader as an, quote, ordinary seaman on the ferries. The process showed us how many barriers rural residents face when trying to access these opportunities. How can you, as our state representatives, support policies and resources that make it easier for rural communities like Vashon to connect with training, apprenticeships, and living wage careers?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest barriers that we've got, particularly for Vashon, one is transportation reliability, where a lot of the jobs are indeed off the island. That's where the apprenticeships are. So making sure people can actually get to the opportunities in a timely and consistent manner, step number one. One of the other barriers we see is access to childcare, right? Like if you're looking to start an apprenticeship that starts at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning and you've got littles, where are you supposed to put them? And I think that's an on mainland and island issue. I also think a little bit of reality check around racial equity and gender equity. I got to go to a convention this summer, Women That Build America, 7,000 women that do trades from across America, plumbers, pipe fitters, iron workers. These ladies were amazing. And the issues that they have in the workplace are the same issues that women in the workplace have everywhere. Respect, dignity, equal access to upward mobility, being treated and paid the same for a day of work as their male counterparts. Unfortunately, we haven't landed that one yet, but we are still working on it. And I think so these building blocks that are a challenge on the mainland, that times a ferry is sort of my answer. I think I'd be really interested in this beautiful facility you hear that is Vashon High School to take a look at what programs we can bring to the island that make getting access to opportunities off the island a smaller gap.
Thank you. That was all yours.
We talked about it in advance.
Okay, I appreciate that. Okay, Vashon Youth and Family Services is the organization. Their question is, given the pending cuts to Medicaid under the Trump administration, what specific actions will you take to mitigate impacts and ensure rural unincorporated communities like Vashon, where nearly 9% of the residents live in poverty? Our population is becoming younger and more diverse, and we also face high rates of death of despair and acute isolation among many islanders, especially older adults. Have sustainable access to behavioral health care, substance use treatment, child care, community resource navigation, and family supports. How will you work to ensure that youth and family services and other safety net providers will collaborate with and continue meeting these growing and changing needs despite limited local resources and our reliance on ferries? Those of us who live on Vashon are not immune from all of those issues.
Yeah, it's a big question to tackle. So a few things, and I don't want to keep repeating ourselves, but I'm passionate about creating a social safety net that makes sure that no one falls. And that's expensive. And in this time, what we need to do is to hear from you as we're making difficult decisions in the budget. What are critical services that can't be touched? And we need to hear from you how we can reimagine our tax code so that we can make the get the revenue so that we don't have to make those decisions. A lot of the answers to those questions, it's like, we know how to put money into providing more behavioral health care. We know how to put money towards providing substance use disorder treatment. We know how to provide resources to home health care supports. It takes resources to do that, and we're in a tough time. I just learned, I don't mean to pivot on this question, but I did just learn recently that if Washington State had the tax code of the average state, so across the board, if each way to tax and assess fees looked mirror to the median or average state, we would have an additional $3 billion a year. We are different than most, and we have very strong values in making investments in our community, and we have a mismatch there. And I know people don't want to talk about taxes, but it is the answer to so many of these questions, unfortunately. I'd say also on your question, far too many people are living in poverty in our district. Across the 34th, we have some of the highest poverty census tracts in all of King County. We also have some of the wealthiest individuals in the state living in this district, and that level of income inequality is so outrageous, and it's driving a lot of the challenges that we see in this country and in this state. And we have to look at ways to address that. Some of the things that we can do to address healthcare needs that are not financial and not investments, we've continued to take steps to cap costs and prices for healthcare access. We continued to look for ways to expand access, for example, to contraception, to cap pricing for insulin, to cap prices for other medications that people regularly use. I know that we should have a common sense healthcare system across this country, so we weren't tinkering, but we are making those adjustments at the state to help get and bring costs down.
Yeah, it's hard to add to that. I mean, I'll say just specific to behavioral health, one of the big investments that we made in the 2023 as well as 2024 budgets were pretty big increases in the Medicaid reimbursement rate to behavioral health providers. That is the biggest way that we drive out state resources as well as federal resources, although less in the future, to the organizations like Vashon Youth and Family Services that are providing behavioral health care. That's how these organizations can afford to pay their workforce more, how they can retain qualified staff, because these are oftentimes jobs that require like a graduate degree and pay like not enough, right? Not enough to pay back your student debt, not enough to live in a community that's expensive. That was somewhere where we saw real strong advocacy by both the organizations providing the care as well as the organizations representing the workers who provide that care for those behavioral health rate increases. A very modest step back I think we did something like a 30% rate increase. Please don't quote me on that, but it was a substantial rate increase in the previous two budgets combined, and I think we did a 1% decrease in this year's budget. Obviously, that's something we would have preferred not to do, but when we look at the arc of the last few years, that's what we need to do, and the way we get there is by reforming our tax code in a way that keeps pace with the needs of the people in our state. It's really hard to say in the absence of that we'll be able to fund anything specifically, because anything you say cuts are off the table in this area just subjects the other areas to greater cuts, and there's really not an area in state government that I think you can cut significantly without hurting people.
On the capital budget side, I will also add we've made some pretty record investments in the last couple of years in investing in behavioral healthcare facilities, including investments, I think, here on Vashon. So the more that we can create more local investments so that there's increased access through our capital budget investments. We need those places to also operate, so then we're dependent on the operating subsidy, but I think being creative about where we site and invest in our behavioral health care system is an important component of it.
Representative Thomas.
Thank you so much. I just want to make sure everybody heard us all say reform our tax code 3 times fast, right? Reform our tax code, reform our tax code, reform our tax code. And the next time you think it, if you could just shoot an email to the governor to let him know that you heard us say it and that you agree, that'd be super helpful.
Okay, thanks.
You said it, not us.
You know, just to be clear, the question was, did you say a state income tax? The challenge we have, the legal challenge we have, is figuring out how one does an income tax in a way that's progressive. There is a lot of wealth in this state, and there is a lot of poverty in this state. And we can and have an opportunity to think about how millionaires and others can contribute to helping us invest in a state where everyone can thrive. So progressive income tax is a good solution.
I was hoping I wouldn't have to put on my mediator hat there for a moment. Let's move from some of these large, macroscopic to more focused, specific topic, one that, of course, is interested, that we're interested in all the time. It's from Vashon, Be Prepared. The question is, can ferry service be improved on the Tahlequah Point Defiance route, the south end route? Overloads and delays are common these days in both directions. An immediate partial improvement could be to fill the weekday midday hole in the schedule. A larger boat on that run would solve the overload problem or help solve the overload problem as well. Any thoughts on that?
I don't think we have great answers on this one, unfortunately. I'm not hearing that there are opportunities to put a different sized boat on the route. I'm very sensitive to the needs for first responders, though, and so we gotta figure out better communication and coordination so that people have access when there are gaps in service. It's something we'll keep talking to the ferries about, but I don't have a great answer on this one. I'm not hearing that there's an opportunity to find a larger vessel, just to be honest.
It can be a real problem, to say the least.
Yeah.
As we talked about a little earlier, another question that an individual asked is related. Is given the legislature's oversight role, what steps will you take to ensure Washington State Ferries develops and adheres to reliable service standards? And what accountability measures will you support to make sure Washington State Ferries has both the resources and the leadership focus needed to keep island communities connected? So.
Well, we keep talking about taxes. You keep asking about resources, so we have to talk about taxes. We raised the gas tax 6 cents this year. We raised it, it feels like a long time ago, in 2015 by 9.5 cents, and a couple of those cents went specifically to plan the next round of ferry construction, and then we launched the subsequent round of ferry construction in the 2022 transportation package, which did not include a gas tax, but was largely funded by the Climate Commitment Act, our state's cornerstone climate law. And then the gas tax increase we passed this year was not to fund really any new projects. It was to address the fact that the cost of delivering the projects that we had already promised, very much including ferries, but also, the 520 bridge, and various other projects, has increased enormously. As you've seen inflation across the economy, but in the construction economy, it's even more. It's much more than the inflation that you see at the grocery store. It's been a tremendous squeeze on our ability to deliver ferries and highways and maintain our ferries and highways. The oversight role, so one of the things that I heard loud and clear from Vashon a number of years ago was that the focus on-time performance that the legislature had mandated for the ferry system was leading to vessels leaving Fauntleroy before they were full. And that is something that, we went back in and amended the law to say that that is not the only criteria that matters. The law didn't say it was the only criteria that mattered, but it did sort of elevate it in a way that may have made a lot of sense in the San Juans, but did not make sense here. We do have our colleagues at the Ferry system and at WashDOT are in front of the transportation committees in the legislature quite regularly, getting pretty tough questions. And I will say that when there's a boat out of service on the Triangle route or on the Tahlequah route, we hear about it from you, and we should, and please keep doing that. And they hear about it from us, and we are pretty diligent about making sure that they know the importance of, for an island community, of making sure that there's reliable ways to get on and off the island. I guess I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I think the other thing is the big moving parts of the ferry system take time to fix. But when you see challenges that are smaller that make a big difference, please tell us, because that's the best opportunity for accountability. We can work with ferries on the margins to expedite small-scale projects so they meet some on-the-ground solutions. On the ground makes less sense for a ferry conversation. But like water taxi, like whatever the smaller pieces are, keep sending them our way, because I think we can actually implement as it comes to lower dollar items, coordination, transparency, information. That's the piece we will keep putting the pressure on.
Let's switch to schools. Got a question from the Vashon Island School District. Last session, the state legislature fell short of the hoped-for funding for Washington's public schools in transportation, materials, supplies, and operation money, while modestly improving the formula for funding special education. We know you support public education. What can you do to convince your colleagues to give more money to Washington public schools? Are we getting back to the income tax?
So about half of the state budget goes to K-12 education. It's just shy of 50. In the past, it was above 50. We've grown funding for K-12 education every year. We've literally never cut funding for K-12 education. Some years that's a lot. Some years it's a medium amount. The fact that it's below 50 right now is a function of the increased efforts that we've put into childcare, higher education, and behavioral health. And the fact that those things have grown, because those are needs too, is the only thing that's kept K-12 from being above 50 in the last few budgets. This year, every area of the budget was cut, except for K-12, which saw a $1.1 billion increase for special education and a $300 million increase for material supplies and operation costs. I know that's not enough. I know the Vashon Island School District does not believe that that's enough, nor does the Seattle School District or the Highline School District, the other ones that we represent. Every school district would like to have more money. Educators, parents, students would all like to see more money in the K-12 system. We made really large increases. The other thing that we did is we lifted the cap on local levies, what local levies could collect, so that on Vashon, the levy that Vashon voters had already approved but was capped by state law, was allowed to go up by 42%, which is $2 million, a $2 million boost to the Vashon Island School District budget. Is that enough? No. You will not hear me say that that is enough for K-12 education. This was a pretty big session. This was a pretty positive session for education funding, in spite of the fact that it was a pretty bad session for funding everything else in the state budget. Do we have more to do? Yes. Can we just devote more of the pie, the existing pie, to K-12 education? Only if you don't want to see, behavioral health and childcare and higher ed. I wish the answer were different.
Okay. Let's change over to cable coverage accessibility. The current estimate for cable coverage accessibility for Vashon Island residents is 85 to 98%, according to AI. Those of us in the other 2 to 15% of the island population who can't access reliable internet are vulnerable during weather emergencies and generally put up with upload and download speeds in the single digits. That's slow. The population of the island is aging and home internet is a modern day necessity. Xfinity has quoted a price of $50,000 per home to make cable available to our West Side Highway community, a price out of reach for many islanders. As the only carrier of cable on Vashon, is there anything the state can do, state legislators can do, to compel Xfinity to make cable accessible to our small sections of Vashon, if not 100% of households on Vashon Island? Any thoughts about your relationship with Comcast or Xfinity?
Well, they're suing us about a tax increase we passed on them, so the relationship's not great. Rural broadband? I mean,
This
so
is one you didn't have.
this was
previous
one that we
notice
didn't have
of.
ahead of time, so I don't know that we can compel Comcast Xfinity to extend cable to a specific home. We have recognized that Vashon and other rural communities around the state, some are in far worse shape than Vashon, particularly in Indian communities, where there's very weak Indian communities, coastal communities, pretty remote parts of eastern Washington. Lack of access to broadband is an economic development issue. It's an equity issue. It's also a safety issue, as I think the question mentioned. So we have a state program to invest in rural broadband. We also created authority for local governments to provide their own broadband. I don't know if that's something that the county has looked into, but we did authorize public entities to provide their own broadband. I don't know if that would work in this case, but we know this is a problem. I guess I would be happy to connect with whoever asked about this question and see how we can connect you to the rural broadband program that at the Department of Commerce that we have started to invest in over the last few years.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
Go ahead.
I don't have a substantive answer, I'm just going to be honest, but there are companies across the board in multiple fields who are finding every opportunity to price gouge right now, and there is a whole lack of transparency in what they do, particularly when they have near monopolies in areas. I was just learning around some credit reporting companies who are now, because of all the work requirement, this is a little bit of a segue, but the work requirements that are being put in place by the federal government, one single credit reporting company is now gouging states across the U.S. to use their credit reporting tool in order to implement those federal laws. So this is what's happening in my head in responding to this. There are a lot of areas where we need to figure out better transparency and accountability on how companies are setting prices for what are, as one that said in the question, basic needs. Broadband, basic need, healthcare. A lot of these areas, we're not seeing adequate transparency in price setting, and I think that's something that the legislature is interested in across the board, and hopefully there are opportunities to engage with the Attorney General's office too in making sure that consumer protection laws are in place, that people aren't getting gouged. So we should, whoever wrote that question, come find us, we'll look into it.
You anticipated a follow-up I was going to ask about as to whether or not the Consumer Protection Division of the Attorney General's office is adequately funded. So nothing's adequately funded probably, but
Nothing is, but at the federal level, they dismantled the Consumer Protection Bureau, which was doing really important things exactly on the issues of monopolies and consumers across the country being harmed. How many Americans living in debt for trying to keep up with basic needs, and it's because companies are running free to be able to gouge all the time. So Consumer Protection Division is really important. We have some of the strongest consumer protection laws here in Washington, and we need to continue to look at ways to put more things under that purview so the AG can be on our side in protecting consumers.
here's a question from an individual from the senior center village. They say, I help our seniors get rides off island, especially to medical appointments. There are diverse ride offerings throughout King County that are not available to us. How would you recommend we get our ride needs met? Or is that a state issue or a county issue
It's going to be the county,
primarily?
primarily the county. That's going to be KC Metro, Little Sound Transit sprinkled in, but not in the purview of the state specifically.
Yeah, well, you never know. You know, like you say,
Well,
really-
happy to talk to, what we do need, and I know we've had these conversations before at WashDOT, is how we time ferries and metro service. So there is a level of coordination that's really essential, and we're happy to engage with our colleagues in King County, Councilmember Mosqueda and others, to look at how agencies are talking, because I think that's really important for people who cross different agencies using transportation.
Let me ask a question that relates to our local healthcare district. Our local healthcare district has included increasing the healthcare safety net on island in its strategic planning for 2026. What is the county or state doing to support healthcare availability for citizens affected by the federal regimes and the healthcare costs?
I don't really know how to answer that without repeating ourselves. We are working to protect the access to healthcare that the state currently provides, primarily through the Medicaid program, also through, we're one of the only states in the country that has not a Medicaid program, but a state-funded healthcare program for people who are ineligible for Medicaid, which again is undocumented and legally present Washingtonians who are not citizens. We, as well as healthcare for public employees, whether that's employees of the state, employees of the county, employees of the school districts. Those are also costs that the state bears. We have healthcare programs for certain groups of retirees. Those are the places. The best thing that we can do is avoid cutbacks there. We've partnered with the health district. We had passed a law through the legislature a few years ago to prevent a levy conflict that would have otherwise arisen between the park district and the health district, and I'm really happy that both of those important, and that was a specific Vashon bill, that we were able to get that through to make sure that both of those community needs could be met. So those are a few of the things that we have and will do.
A few other things on healthcare access, and we had talked about this a little while ago. We continue to look at, they're not very exciting bills on scope of practice to help make it easier for different practitioners to provide lower cost healthcare. We see that in dental and in other areas, and that's something that's important. Nursing, that's something important in
Physical
rural
therapy.
communities. Physical therapy, there you go, all the examples. We optometrists, we've passed a lot of scope of practice laws, and it does help to provide lower cost healthcare and more access to healthcare, especially in communities that weren't otherwise getting that access. And the other thing I'll just mention is that a staggering number of folks who pay out of pocket for their healthcare then are straddled with medical debt. And it's a really incredible number of people across the country and in this state who have medical debt. We've tried to take some actions on minimizing the impact of medical debt. Last year, passed a law that would ban having medical debt show up in credit reports. As folks might have seen, President Trump just made an announcement that states are not able to do that, and he will be taking action to remove those laws from state laws. So we need to continue to look at how we address medical debt. I'm interested in the fact that folks pay interest on medical debt. Maybe they shouldn't. So there are more things that we can do as we look to increase access. How do we also address the fact that people are doing whatever they can to access what they can for themselves and their families, and they shouldn't lose their homes and their livelihood over it?
Yeah, we do definitely encourage you in that regard as you,
I'll just
as
add,
a rural.
President Trump has not yet learned, and probably won't ever learn, that the president cannot just override a state law. That's not how our constitutional system works. Even Congress can only override state laws in very certain specific circumstances. So, he's also said that he was going to override our climate laws with executive order. That's mercifully not how it works.
Yeah, I hope that that there's a lot of discussion and thought about how to react to that, because we don't want to have to wait 3 years. A lot of damage can be done, as we found out here in the first 12 months of this last year.
And I will say, I just want to acknowledge our Attorney General, Nick Brown, who's working, I think he's done another unprecedented number of lawsuits to help protect us against federal government overreach. So we appreciate his efforts.
All right, I've got one last question because we're almost out of time. Yeah, this is an easy, well, it's an easy question. The answer may not be so easy. I know Washington State passed a law a few years ago for daylight savings time year-round. Can we change that law to have standard time year-round? What does it take to change the official law of standard versus daylight savings time?
So under federal law, you can adopt permanent standard time as a state on your own. In order to adopt permanent daylight time, you need approval from Congress, which Congress has not yet provided to us. So there is a debate about, should we just go to permanent standard time? It's just a question of, do you have more light in the morning or do you have more light in the evening? You know, I hear from a lot of parents who say, like, it's pretty tough to get my kid out the door if it's not getting, when it's not getting light until 9 a.m. So, you know, there's really arguments on either side. I cannot tell you that I have a strong opinion about it. I will say, as a parent, as a new parent, you know, daylight savings time, not a fun transition with a 17-month-old.
All right, I'll tell you what, it is 16 after the hour. I'm going to give you a little more than a minute and a half that we had scheduled for your final remarks. So with that in mind, take all of 3 minutes each for any final remarks you might have. Who'd like to start out? You want to do it in reverse order from what you started with?
Sure. Thank you all for coming out, by the way. Give yourselves a round of applause for still caring about democracy. Running out of that lately. I hope that despite our many recitations of the need for the tax code to be reformed, I don't know if you picked up on that as a theme this evening. I hope you heard 3 people in front of you that clearly care about their communities still in the face of a fascist regime and the defunding of our states by the federal government in cruel, unusual, and very expensive ways. My first year in Olympia, I referred to it as the Thunderdome. That is kind of what lawmaking feels like right now. Like you are going into battle with people who have completely opposite values and priorities and sensibilities and commitment to community that you do, but they got sent there, so those are the folks you have to deal with. I think that what gives me hope right now is that we've got new people coming in like myself that are willing to pick up the banner, that are willing to continue to fight, that are willing to work with their colleagues and their teammates to put new knees in the game and put new elbows out. Like, we're not giving up a fight for our democracy and for our community and for the soul of this nation. And we're going to do it one very aggressive and annoying protest at a time until they catch a clue. We're not going to be run over. I will also take credit for everything that Nick Brown does, since he's a member of the 34th. And I just thank you all for continuing to give me the grace to grow in my new job, and I appreciate my teammates. You may not know this, but other districts do not get along as well as we do. They don't have clear lanes, and they don't have somebody that does jokes for a closing. So I appreciate being part of the delegation.
You know, I guess I want to close by talking about some of the good things that that are happening. We passed, and because of where my experience lies, it's a lot of these examples are going to be things in the natural resources arena. We passed a tremendous recycling reform law this year that's going to make recycling easier for people across the state and incentivize producers of packaging to use less packaging first and foremost, and if they are using packaging, to make it recyclable, because they're going to be charged more if it's not. We passed a law to dramatically strengthen our clean fuel standard, which is our law that requires that the greenhouse gas intensity of your gasoline and diesel go down over time. Previously, it was a pretty slow ramp up, and it was such a slow ramp up that it wasn't really having much of an impact. We raised the standard from 10 and 20% over a long period of time to 40% over a shorter period of time. We are seeing salmon recover in places that we have made investments in salmon habitat, including here on Vashon and elsewhere in Central Puget Sound. We have solved, a couple years ago, incredible scientists at WSU Puyallup and with an assist from UW, solved a mystery of there was a chemical that was killing coho salmon and we didn't know what it was, and they traced it back to this chemical in tires. Then we at least knew it was that, but we didn't yet know what to replace that chemical with in tires, or what tire manufacturers needed to replace it with, because it was necessary for tires to not disintegrate, which is bad. I just learned a few weeks ago that a tire manufacturer believes they have found an alternative to that chemical that is not toxic to coho salmon, and that we are going to plan on trying this year to require that all tire manufacturers shift away to the safer chemical. We passed legislation this last year protecting the rights of students in our public schools to keep their health information private, in spite of a really strong attack from people that was, honestly really motivated by anti-gay, anti-trans, anti-reproductive freedom sentiment. We rolled that back to still protect the rights of parents and the rights of students, to make sure that students' privacy rights were protected. We are making some headway. It's not all doom and gloom about the budget. That is a lot of what it is, but that's our job to fix that. We've got to put the state on a sustainable trajectory where we have taxes and spending not growing at different rates. That doesn't work, and that's our big assignment over the next few years. But in the meantime, we're doing a ton to protect the rights of immigrants, of LGBTQ people, to protect our climate, to protect our air quality, to protect our water quality, and to support communities that have been left behind of all kinds. So there is hope, and there's a lot of really good work happening, and it's not always the work that gets the headlines, but I'm proud of the work that we get to do on your behalf. So thank you for the trust that you've put in us.
So I just want you to feel that we are here to really stand up for our values, and not only to defend against what's happening in the other Washington, but to be proactive on climate, to be proactive on reproductive health care, to be proactive on affordability. We passed more housing affordability bills than almost any state, trying to move the needle forward. So we're gonna keep pushing back and defending. We're gonna keep moving forward on affordability. And we're gonna keep showing that Washington what it looks like to actually govern. Part of why you hear us talk so much about the budget is because it's real, it's messy, it's not easy, but we show up and we have the fights and we engage with stakeholders because we wanna make those investments in our kids, in our food, in our health, in our future. The other Washington has abdicated the work. They walked away. they're not even having the tough conversations. So when it feels tough, know that's us fighting for you and with you, and we're gonna keep going out there and fighting. And I wanna say one other thing. The best emails I get all session, I probably shouldn't have this on camera, are from folks on Vashon. You all are so engaged, and I want to reflect back to you on you're engaged about such deeply caring things. Sure, you talk about the ferries, but I heard more from folks on Vashon about surveillance and concerns about surveillance, and then look what happened, right? You saw it as an issue, and you said, please step up on looking at this. You step up on criminal justice reforms in a way that almost no one else in this state is, really having a heart and caring about reform and caring about people. So I see that, and I am really honored and proud to represent all of you, and I'll keep trying to bring that humanity and that hard work. So thank you.
All right, I want to thank our legislators, Senator Alvarado, Representative Fitzgibbon, and Representative Thomas. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
And I want to thank all of you who attended today. I think that we all learned something, and I feel better myself. I thank the partner organizations who are involved and members of the Islanders for Ferry Action. Wendy Ammon, Rick Wallace, Beth Lindsay, and Amy Dreyer. And we'll see you soon. Good night.
Thank you.